Hi, this is Aryan and you are watching The Cool Mentor. So in this module, we walk through creating a component with focus on clearly defining the component's part, their meaning and their purposes. So we can think of our Angular application as a set of components. We create each components, then arrange them to form an application. So in this module, we take a closer look at what an Angular component is and examine the code we need to build one. And we walk through how to create component class and how and why we need to define metadata. So we will discuss first what is a component, then creating the component class, then defining metadata with a decorator, then import what we needed, and then bootstrap our app component. The Angular CLI created the index.html file and the app component, and in this module we will rebuild this app component. So let's get started. First, what is component? An Angular component includes a template which lays out the user interface views for the application. It is created with HTML and define what is rendered on the page. We use Angular binding and directives in the HTML to power off the views. Now add a class for the code associated with the view. This class is created with TypeScript and the class contains the properties and the data element available for use in the views. Suppose if we want to show a title in the views, we define a class property for that title. And class also contain methods which are the functions for the logic needed by the view. And a component also has a metadata which provides additional information about the component to Angular. And it is this metadata that define this class as an Angular component. The metadata is defined with a decorator. So now have a look on decorator. A decorator is a function that adds metadata to a class, its members and its method arguments. So a component is a view defined in a template, its associate code defined with a class, and metadata defined with a decorator. Here is our class. It defines the properties and methods needed by our views. Here is the component decorator that defines the metadata, and the metadata includes the template that lays out the view managed by this component. And here we import the member that we needed. Let's examine each part in more detail. First, creating the component class. So a class is a construct that allows us to create a type with properties that define the data element and method that provide functionality. We define a class using the keyword class followed by the class name. So a common Angular convention is to name each component class with the feature name, then append the word component as the suffix. Also by convention, the root component for an application is called app component. The export keyword exports this class, thereby making it available for use by other component of the application. Within the body of the class are the properties and methods. A property defines a data element associated with a class. We write property in camel case, that is, the first letter should be the lowercase. And method names are often verbs that describe the action the method performs. We write method name in camel case. So this is all about the class, but a class alone is not enough to define a component. We need to define the template associated with this component class. So how do we provide this extra information to Angular? So with metadata, we can provide this information. A class becomes an Angular component when we give it component metadata, and Angular needs that metadata to understand how to instantiate the component, construct the views, and interact with the component. We define a component metadata with the Angular component function. In TypeScript, this function is attached to the class as a decorator. So now have a look on the decorator. A decorator is a function that adds metadata to a class, its members, or its method arguments. A decorator is a JavaScript language feature that is implemented in TypeScript. A decorator is always prefixed with @, and Angular has several built-in decorators we use to provide additional information to Angular, and we can also build our own decorators. We apply decorators immediately above the class signature. Notice there is no semicolon here in the below. We use the @component decorator to identify the class as a component. Since the decorator is a function, we always add parentheses. We pass the object that has several properties. So if we plan to reference the component in any HTML, we specify a selector. So the selector defines the component's directive name, and a directive is simply a custom HTML tag. So whenever the directive is used in the HTML, Angular renders this component's template. So we will see practically in the upcoming videos. So a component should always have a template, and here we define the layout for the user interface fragment and views managed by this component. Double curly braces indicates data binding. We will cover more about data binding in the upcoming demos. Now the last key task is importing. So the import statement is part of the ES 2015 and implemented in TypeScript. It is conceptually similar to the import statement applied in Java or C# using a statement. So we will use the import statement throughout the code to import any third-party libraries any of our own module or from Angular itself. Now, Angular is modular, so we can import from Angular because Angular is modular. It is a collection of library modules. Each library is itself a module made up of several related feature modules. When we need something from Angular, we simply import it from an Angular library module. And for more detail, you can browse this URL. Use this link if you want to view the list of available Angular libraries package and their current versions. We identify the name of the member we need within curly braces. So in this case, we need the component decorator. If we need multiple member from the same module, we can list them all in the import list separated by commas. So now we are ready to build the first component for our employee management system project.